Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you guys today. Definitely a little bit about who I am and kind of more of a general idea of what I do. And then also just a little bit of information about what we are doing in space right now and what kind of things to keep an eye out for, because there really is a lot happening in space. So I definitely love to be able to share that. But yeah, pretty much as you just heard, ever since I was a little girl, I've always been interested in space. The idea of becoming an astronaut. And really, I got interested, and my dad kind of remembers me running and asking him questions about space and about Mars. And, have we ever been to Mars before? Is space real? When I was younger, I definitely didn't have any sort of idea as to what space was. But basically, my dad told me a little bit about the missions to the moon, the little bit of information he knew. Again, no one in my family really had any sort of space or science background, so it was very general information. And then he told me that one day we could possibly go to Mars. And so I definitely got my sights set to be an astronaut. So kind of in the Baton Rouge, Louisiana area, really just going to libraries, finding books, posters, videos, stuff to learn about space. And then kind of from there is when I started looking for more opportunities to build up my dream. I started out by going to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, and there was really just kind of where I fully flourished in terms of space, just because it was a place where I was able to really learn all the information about space that I was really wanting to know. And so while I was at space camp, I was able to build model rockets and be around people who were teaching me all about space history and the future of space. And so definitely after my first time at space camp, which was around 7, I was pretty much decided that this was definitely something I wanted to go into. But really kind of the next step for me was figuring out what exactly I did want to do, because an astronaut really isn't a job. You have to have a job to apply to be an astronaut. So an astronaut is kind of more of a destination, more of somewhere you can bring your career to. So I definitely first had to figure out, what kind of astronaut would I want to be? What did I want to do as a job, as a career, besides just being an astronaut? Because it's really important to be just as passionate about that as well. Again, Space Camp kind of helped with that, just because we had simulated missions at Space Camp. So I was able to play the role of, a commander on a space flight, and then play the role of a mission specialist or someone working in mission control, or just different roles. And so in terms of doing that, I was able to really figure out what kind of roles there were in the space industry and kind of get an idea of what I wanted to do. I did end up in astrobiology, which is what I'm in right now. Like you heard, I am a sophomore at Florida Tech, currently studying astrobiology. And so to kind of give you an idea of what astrobiology is, a lot of people jump to aliens, which is fair. I get it. But yeah, definitely astrobiology is more than just aliens. It just kind of sounds like aliens with bio and space, but pretty much astrobiology is almost like general science in space. So it's kind of similar to astrophysics and a lot of more of those typical space majors, but it's a bit more broad. So you really study all the different sciences. So you could study bacteria in space, plants in space. You could study planets as a whole if you wanted to search other solar systems for planets similar to Earth, or any little things like that. You can also be in charge of an experiment that goes up to the International Space Station. Any information about that experiment would be relayed back to you, so you could inform the astronauts what's to do next. What do these results mean? Any information you need, so you can kind of lead any sort of scientific experiment that happens in space, which is pretty cool. So I really enjoyed kind of the idea of astrobiology. What kind of led me to it was just because it was something that I could really change my mind on. I didn't have to settle on studying one thing immediately. If in a few years I want to change and study something else, I kind of have that option. And then also kind of thinking with the mission to Mars, definitely it's going to be a mission that no one has ever been on before, quite an adventurous mission. And so I wanted to kind of have knowledge of all the sciences, have a bit of a wider range, because, let's say I had, a chemistry background, let's say we're on Mars, but we need to do some sort of biology experiment. So I wanted to be able to kind of cross between the different sciences. I will probably do more of a biology pathway within astrobiology, just because I like biology more than physics. But yeah, that's kind of like my plan at the moment. So pretty much all the stuff I've been doing is really to build a resume to eventually apply to the astronaut selection process, which will be after I get my master's. So that's kind of the goal for that. But yeah, really just building my resume, of course, with school, but getting anything else. I got my advanced scuba certification. I'm also a private pilot. All the stuff with POSSUM, as you heard, POSSUM is their main focus is like science in the upper atmosphere, but they do a lot more than that. So like with them, I've been able to do microgravity flights, water survival training, G-force training, spacesuit evaluations. I'm currently taking a class with them right now talking about underwater spacesuit evaluations and actually running through missions underwater. And that's really fascinating because actually underwater is the closest we can get to long-term microgravity here on Earth. You notice in the pool, let's say like your family, they weigh really, really light in the pool. And so it's kind of like that same concept that we use to pretend to be in microgravity. So it's really fascinating to learn about that and those things. So I've been able to kind of get that exposure. But definitely a little bit about the mission to Mars itself, just because that's what we're working on. That's really the next plans. It's all, and this is kind of referencing NASA's plans and NASA's missions to go to Mars. SpaceX has mentioned an interest of going to Mars. There's been a lot of people having an interest in Mars. So definitely this is kind of NASA's plans at the moment. But obviously the Artemis program is the next program that we're really starting up. So the plans are to go back to the moon by the late 2020s and then on to Mars by the early 2030s. So that's the goal. Some of the goals of getting back to the moon, one, to just kind of get back to the moon. I'm also sending the first female to the moon. So a lot of those astronauts have actually already been chosen. And so all those astronauts are really in preparation for the Artemis program to get going. But hopefully we will see a launch from the SLS Space Launch System, the brand new rocket that NASA has built. We'll see a launch from that rocket sometime this year. I'm pretty sure that rocket can only like rest for so long, like it needs to like be launched at some point. And so I think like its time frame kind of runs towards the end of this year. So hopefully we'll see a launch coming up soon. So that's something exciting to like keep an eye out for. And then eventually on to Mars in the early 2030s. And that's kind of the goal, and kind of the plans with Mars is we'd be using that same SLS Space Launch System rocket and the Orion capsule. And those are going to be the two components that actually do bring humans to Mars. And right now with current technology, it's going to take about 6 months to get from Earth to Mars. And then the astronauts are going to have to live there for probably a little over a year, and then 6 to 9 months back. And a lot of the times kind of vary, and that's just because you have to kind of think about it. Earth and Mars are both orbiting the sun, and they don't orbit in perfect circles. So that means that sometimes Mars is really close to us. We say really close, it's not really that close, but it's close to us. And sometimes it's really, really far from us. And so we want to launch and come back when Mars is at that closest point. So that's kind of why we have to stay on Mars for so long. And really what we want to do with Mars and kind of the idea for Mars is there's been a lot of ideas thrown out there, ideas of terraforming, ideas of colonizing Mars. And so the first mission is really going to be people really having an understanding of, okay, this is what we want to do with Mars. How realistic is that? How long would those ideas take? And so that's really what we're trying to figure out. But there's really a lot of science going on with Mars even right now. Some of you may have watched Perseverance recently land on Mars, NASA's new rover. The main goal of Perseverance is actually to search for ancient life on Mars. And by saying ancient life, we're looking for just bacteria. Any sort of bacterial life that used to live on Mars or is possibly still living on Mars. Basically, we have found liquid water, steam, ice, a lot of potential on Mars. And so that rover's really its main task is to see if we can find any of those bacteria, maybe identify them. But again, that's going to be a lot of what humans kind of take over once we get there. But I'm kind of talking about how popular Mars is. I did want to kind of reference, we had Perseverance obviously land on Mars, but actually in the month of February, we had 3 different things go to Mars. So we had Perseverance from NASA. I know the UAE also had something go to Mars. I'm trying to remember if it was a lander or just a satellite. And then China also sent something to Mars. So definitely a lot of interest with Mars at the moment and just doing research, trying to figure out more about it. So it's really kind of amazing to see that excitement come up about Mars. So hopefully you guys kind of stay in the know about it just because there is a lot happening in the space industry. SpaceX has been sending astronauts astronauts to the International Space Station, which they will continue to do. So it's going to be exciting to see more of those flights. Just really exciting to have astronauts from the U.S. again launching off of American soil as we continue to do that. SpaceX also has announced that they are doing a all-civilian flight, which is pretty interesting. It's all for a fundraiser actually for St. Jude. So they are actually just getting like lottery tickets pretty much, like you just can enter and possibly be on a multi-day flight to space. So that's pretty fascinating. And then also later this year, we will have a new telescope being launched, the James Webb Telescope, which is going to be basically taking the place of the Hubble telescope, but its job is mainly going to be looking at deep space. So being able to look at other galaxies, star nurseries, things like that, to be able to get a better understanding of what else is out there, watching how other solar systems form, to figure out if we can figure out how we exactly formed. We have a lot of good ideas with that, but definitely having the telescope to be able to look further is always helpful. So that's actually planning on launching later this year. So like I said, a lot of involvement right now in space. Space is always busy. And so it's definitely exciting to kind of see all that happening and all to come. And then also you heard I'm also an intern with Jacobs, another aspect of my life as well. But yeah, Jacobs is, to kind of give you an idea, they're one of NASA's largest contractors. They do a lot of work with NASA. But as a company, they do a whole lot of stuff, but I'm on their international space relations team. And so, yeah, that's why I'm kind of been dealing a lot with space agencies all over the world. And so doing projects with that. And so that's been really fascinating for me personally, really just to learn more about other space agencies, what they're up to. But yeah, it's been really fascinating to see what other goals they have, what interests they have with Mars or satellites or studying the atmosphere. And so there's really a lot of collaboration currently in the space industry, not only between different space agencies around the world, but also between the public and private sector of space. It's been really fascinating for that to kind of like come about, just because NASA and SpaceX partner together. SpaceX has been sending NASA astronauts, but at the same time, SpaceX does offer a bit of competition. SpaceX definitely says they want to go to Mars, kind of offers that competition to NASA. And so it's been really fascinating to see that it's not exactly like how the space race was, but we do have that collaboration and competition kind of happening at the moment. So that's very fascinating. A new dynamic, but I think it's something that's going to be more beneficial for the future, just because, it's more of that healthy competition. Whereas during the space race, it was competition. It just kind of wasn't the healthiest type of competition. So that's been really exciting to kind of see happen. And definitely the private sector of space in general has been really fascinating. Of course, SpaceX has been one of like the leading ones, but there's definitely a lot more. Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, a lot of those have a lot of stuff in the works. Of course, Virgin Galactic is kind of leaning more towards like the space tourism side. So possibly just sending everyday people to space all the time. So you could just book not like a vacation, but, just a little journey to space for the day if you were feeling like an adrenaline junkie that day, I guess, and just wanted to go to space. So that's really fascinating to see how that's going to like come into play. So I think kind of the next steps in the space industry is really just kind of making space, I guess, a bit more normal. Obviously, space isn't something that we all typically think of on our day-to-day basis, just because we're not really like connected to it. It's up there, but it's not really something we think about. And so I do think that those are really the next steps in space is, a lot of the stuff we do in space, one, we've been doing it for 60, 70 years. And also it's a lot of the stuff that we do in space is really similar to what we do down here. And so, I think really the next step is kind of like connecting those two between kind of the general public and space. We have kind of more of a better idea of what's happening. And that's kind of like the last point I really do want to hit on is really the benefits of space. Just because I do think it's a really common misconception to think that we just kind of spend millions of dollars on a rocket and then sometimes you just watch it blow up and then you're like, what was that for? But yeah, everything in space really does have a purpose. And so definitely not being super involved in the space industry, I can see how it does kind of look like a waste of money and time a lot of the time. But really a lot of the benefits that we're getting, one, from the mission to Mars and just kind of in space in general, is one, a lot of just really amazing technologies. We're inventing and developing a lot of technologies. And then we're also, as we solve problems in space, we can then use those ideas to solve a lot of problems here on Earth. So there's so much technology that we use in our day-to-day lives that was actually invented for the space program or by the space program. And so we just don't really think about it just because it's now been marketed to something totally normal. So it doesn't really have as much of a connection to space anymore. And then also like space really pushes us to think out of the box and think of crazier, bigger ideas. And so that kind of helps us in solving problems. One idea or problem that we still have with the mission to Mars is how are we going to feed astronauts for over a year? We can't pack that much food. So we're trying to figure out, can we grow food using Martian soil? If we can figure out how to grow food using Martian soil, we can probably then use whatever method we're using to then also help areas here on Earth that maybe struggle with agriculture and struggle growing crops. If we can do it on Mars, I'm sure we can do it down here. Also inventing new technologies. Like I said, it takes 6 months to get from Earth to Mars. We already know we have the technology to reduce that time to 6 weeks. So that newer engine, maybe that newer engine could then be reused as on a smaller level for airplanes, maybe make airplanes faster, better for the environment, things like that. So definitely as we solve stuff up there, it's definitely solving stuff down here at the same time. They work together. They don't work against each other. A lot of the times when we talk about Mars, a lot of people jump to the idea that we're trying to just run away from all of our problems here on Earth and run to Mars. And that's definitely not the case. It's all kind of, as we learn stuff about space and about Mars, we're able to use it down here as well. And even the ideas of colonizing Mars, it's definitely not running away from Earth. It's definitely just to have ideas, if population continues to grow, maybe we have 2 planets to live on to lessen some of the strain of resources here on Earth. Or, eventually maybe we learn to travel to other planets, and that's just kind of how we get around. Of course, a lot of those things are much long-term, but it's definitely stuff to think about and stuff we have to prepare for even now. And so that's kind of the idea of space travel, is really preparing and getting us ready for future generations. I did want to leave some time for questions because I know I just talked about so much information. I'm sure you guys are probably slightly overwhelmed with the amount of information I just gave out. But yeah, I did want to leave some time for questions if you're confused about anything that I said, or if I didn't talk about something that you're interested in. So I want to have some time for that before I have to run. So just slide your questions into the chat and I will get to them.
So we do have a few questions, and I would like to say, this was great. You're obviously a very forward-thinking young woman who's very strategic. Is this something you've always been, just naturally that way, or did you have to cultivate the motivation to get to where you are?
Yeah, I think a lot of things kind of came as a factor of it. I mean, really, the more I learned about space, the more I was interested in space. But at the same time, I think having a balanced life really also helped in keeping my interest in space. When I was younger, of course, I liked space, but, I also played competitive soccer and did ballet and piano and was in Girl Scouts and was in this, that, and the other. And, was just totally a normal kid as well. And so I think that really helped keeping my interest in space because I wasn't always talking about space. I wasn't always doing something for space. So when I had the opportunity to, let's say, go to space camp over the summer, I was ecstatic. I was excited to be able to do it. And so I think that's really helped. And since I learned that pretty early on and kind of had that sort of lifestyle early on, I've kind of kept that into my day-to-day life now. I'm not, even though I'm studying astrobiology and that kind of overwhelmed my life, I'm still not really always talking about space. And so I think having that balance is really important. And it really applies to, of course, not only me, but, in your own life, let's say within a job, you don't want to focus too much on one project. You don't want to overthink it. You want to kind of keep that balance between your work life, personal life, any sort of extracurriculars. It's a really important skill to just kind of develop. And it's been developing for many years.
So Shard Richard wants to know, do you know former Louisiana young hero Haley Arsenault? And how do you feel about the wonderful opportunity that she's being provided to travel to outer space? And he also is very proud of you.
Yeah, I feel like her name sounds kind of familiar. I'm trying to remember. I don't think she was in my group. I'm pretty sure she was in a different one, but
yeah, she was.
Yeah, her name does sound familiar, but I'll probably look a little bit more into her just to kind of remember. I know I had looked through so many of the young heroes when I did it. And so, yeah, I'll definitely go and look some more up about her to see what she's doing today. That would be really fascinating.
Awesome. And, Todd, certainly having known you for quite some time, he's very complimentary of you and also to your dad for encouraging you to do things literally like flying. Mel Robertson asked, what type of liability is associated with public citizens that travel to space with some of these initiatives, especially for non-astronauts?
Yeah, totally. It's definitely a new area that we're just starting to get involved in. Obviously, space tourism isn't fully there. Virgin Galactic is still not sending just anyone. They're still doing test flights, so they're not there yet. But the idea with like SpaceX's recent flight of sending two civilians, it's very interesting. It's called. Oh my gosh, what's the name of it? Like Innovation 4 or something is like the name of the mission. So you can kind of go look through some of their terms, which is like kind of fascinating. But yeah, you pretty much just sign away that you're okay with any sort of preparation, any sort of flight to space. It's very interesting, especially since it's like a multi-day voyage to space. It's not like a suborbital flight way. For example, with Virgin Galactic, a lot of their ideas with space tourism, it's kind of like you'll be in, of course, some sort of spacecraft, not really a rocket, but basically you would go up and you would cross the line that we've designated is space, and you wouldn't actually go into orbit. You would actually go up there, kind of just like hover, well, not like hover, but like kind of go around the globe a little bit, but it's be for a few hours and then you come back down. So it's like all in a day. You go up, you experience space, you're up there for 4 to 6 hours, you come back down. So that's kind of the idea behind space tourism and like what we're going to start out with, rather than living in space or staying in space like astronauts. But that's definitely a challenge that we're going to have. How do we distinguish astronauts who are working in space versus people who are just visiting space? So it's definitely a whole new avenue to explore. So it's just really going to be fascinating to see the way they work with that.
So Shelley Dupree says, this is great. What would you say to young girls who are interested in a career in space or in science, but are intimidated and aren't sure where to start with this type of curriculum?
Yeah, totally. I mean, for, any girls who have any sort of interest with space or science, I'm definitely encouraging to go into it. It's definitely an amazing field to get into. I definitely say first, it's really just starting out, figuring out what you want to do. And that's, of course, the first step. And, it's always really easy to kind of look back on school subjects, figure out what you're interested in. But I think a big thing is, one, thinking past a lot of, the typical jobs that we think of. Definitely when we're young and we're thinking about stuff to go into, we kind of just get kind of blinded by a lot of, I guess, general jobs, doctor, teacher, lawyer. There's a lot of ones that we just kind of get told over and over again, where, kind of the more obscure, like rocket scientists and spacesuit designer, or, things like that, has, or like who these kids have the chance to go into, definitely aren't really talked about as much. So at first, definitely explore to really be adventurous in terms of like what subject you're into. Try to find those bizarre jobs to see if one really sticks, and don't be afraid to, try to match your interests. If you're interested in space, but also like fashion, design spacesuits, go for it. SpaceX is having superhero designers design their spacesuits. So definitely, don't be afraid to kind of mix those interests. And then I think really the next steps are looking for any opportunities in your local area, and really that can start with clubs at school. Any things that may seem small really can make a difference. And while you're taking advantage of those opportunities, maybe it's going to a science museum or going here, going there, maybe some sort of camp, don't be afraid to talk about your dreams and talk about your goals, just because you really never know who somebody else knows. So being able to talk about your dreams is really important, because who knows, they could have someone who could really help you, lead you on your path towards your dreams. So that's a huge thing. And then finally, just having someone to support you in your dreams, whether it's a parent, teacher, friend, anyone, having, just someone there to tell you like, yeah, you can do this, or maybe helping you look for some of those opportunities, or just being like, wow, that's cool. Just at like something you found, for me, my dad was obviously a huge support for me. And so I definitely don't think I could be where I am without him. And so I think having, at least one person being a cheerleader for you is really important. So those would be like my biggest tips.
Awesome. Shard wants to know, with the rigors of space travel, how do you physically train to prepare for this program?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. Obviously, there is some sort of physical training to be able to go to space. At this point, for example, like where I am, there's not anything that I'm like on a strict like schedule or anything. I just kind of have in my mindset to stay, relatively fit and healthy. So pretty much to apply to the astronaut selection process, you have to have a master's and then a few years of work experience, or if you're a pilot, it's 1,000 hours of flying, and then passing the physical. So once I kind of get closer, I would kind of train more for that physical, the physical exam that you take, just to kind of like make sure I'm as healthy as I can for those different tests that they go through. And then kind of once you're selected as an astronaut candidate, then you'll go through, basic astronaut training, and then you'll train specifically for a mission. All that kind of comes a little bit later after you're selected. But yeah, I would probably do more, intense, like scheduled out training or physical training to like get more fit closer to like when I'm going through that physical.
So Rob Wise says he wants to know, what is your favorite space themed movie or book?
Yeah, there's a few. Definitely some of my favorites, I guess, like for movies and stuff, would be The Martian. I think The Martian's a really good movie. I also think it got a lot of people excited about Mars, which is really awesome. Apollo 13 is also a pretty good classic. And then I guess for like more sci-fi, like Contact, was a good movie for, talking about aliens. And then definitely like in terms of books, it's definitely just reading books, I guess, for me in terms of from other astronauts, is always really fascinating. I'm always curious to hear their stories. Some astronauts, for example, Clayton Anderson is a really good example. He wrote a book because he applied to the astronaut selection process 7 times before he got selected. And something really important to remember, I guess, like if you're trying to get into the astronaut selection process, is there's a lot of factors that go into it besides just your resume. And so your chance of getting selected the first time is really not that high, but it has nothing to do with how qualified you are. So first of all, it kind of depends on what's happening in the space industry. Right now they're doing a lot of tests. So they're probably getting people with a lot more military backgrounds. But once they're starting to go to the moon and starting to go to Mars, they're going to need more people with that civilian scientist background to be able to do the science. Or right now they just may have a whole lot of pilots and they're just like in desperate need of more scientists. So you could be the best candidate there could be for a pilot, but they just have too many of them at the moment. And so there's definitely a lot of factors that play into the selection process. So his story is really inspiring, how they kept applying and kept going for it. But yeah, a lot of astronauts have amazing stories and books that they've written.
It's cool. Now, you mentioned you're an astrobiologist or studying astrobiology, and the movie The Martian. How close did they get to actually being able to grow potatoes on Mars?
Yeah, it's really funny. Even like at my university, we actually have like a Mars box. It's not really a box. It's like closer to like the size of a small closet. But it's pretty much where we simulate the Martian atmosphere. So that's really fascinating. And then we also, Martian regolith is actually what we're using to try to figure out how to grow stuff with using Martian soil. So Martian regolith is pretty much as close as we can get to Martian soil. I know they've been successful with lettuce. Don't know about potatoes yet. So the word's still out, but we have had some success with like lettuce and a few other things. So a lot of more research is still going into that and still figuring out how we can grow more and more plants in space and on Mars. But yeah, that's kind of what we hope to do, but obviously more of a variety than just potatoes.
Genevieve Silverman asked, other than exploring Mars, what are some of the other interesting projects that NASA is working on that you might be aware of?
Yeah, totally. Of course, NASA is, they have so many areas, so many other projects going on. One of like the largest ones, actually, I guess the 2 large ones, kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, Perseverance just landing. That's been, a big focus of NASA recently, is really just Perseverance landing on Mars, getting all the photos and stuff from Mars, sound from Mars. We've gained a lot of information already. The James Webb Telescope, the new telescope being launched later this year, is the next big project. And then for going back to the moon, a lot of those astronauts have already been chosen for those missions. And so kind of training those astronauts, getting them in preparation for that mission, doing more specific training for that. And then, yeah, kind of anything else, a lot of, for example, a lot of the astronauts that Spacex is sending, those are NASA astronauts. Some of them are retired, some of them not. And so astronauts either preparing for that or, the mission to the moon as well. But yeah, really a lot of what they've been working on for the past few years has been building the new SLS rocket. They have the first one fully built, so they're actually working on building the second one. And Michoud, actually, down in New Orleans, has a pretty big part in building NASA's new rocket. So that's pretty fascinating to, yeah, Louisiana has a pretty big part in what's going on right now in the space industry and building that new rocket. But yeah, they're currently building the second one of the new rockets. And yeah, like I said, hopefully getting the launch of that first one down by this year. So a lot of stuff to kind of watch and keep an eye out for.
Now, I know you're a college student. You got to get to class here in a few minutes. So we got one last question. Genevieve also wants to know, who is the most interesting person you've been able to meet during your journey? And to add a little bit to that, have you been able to interact with different astronauts?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of really amazing people I've been able to meet. Astronauts, people who work in the industry, also people from all over the world. Of course, ESA astronauts and things like that are really fascinating to meet. Of course, astronauts are always great. One in particular who was pretty big inspiration for me was Sandra Magnus. So she was a female shuttle astronaut, and I actually met her when I was 9 at here in Louisiana. Basically when there was like Sally Ride Festival still going on, she was like one of the guest speakers. So she really inspired me because she told me she was around 9 or so when she first got interested in being an astronaut. So she really just kind of motivated me and made me realize it didn't matter the age I had decided to do this. If it was something I wanted to do, I could work hard and achieve it. So she definitely had a huge impact on me. And then also like throughout the different things of training, but also speaking as well, being able to go to different conferences. Chris Hadfield, he's a pretty cool astronaut. He plays the guitar, swoons everyone. So that's pretty amazing. But yeah, definitely just a lot of big people in the space industry has been really cool to meet. Elon Musk, I haven't gotten to meet. So if you're thinking that, I sadly have not met him, but I have met his sister's ex-boyfriend, I think is who he was, but that's as close as I've gotten. So sadly, I don't have that connection yet, but yeah, I'm trying to, wingle my way in there.
That sounds great. Alyssa, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. Fascinating conversation, and just wish you the best of success.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.